lecture is primarily focused on the Anunnaki guru and how we got to this place of connecting it with the Yucatan and other cultures as well. There was some modifications to the schedule, mostly because of the rules that the park changed on us that allowed the equinox event to happen, because we were told it was closing at 4:30. So it put us in a quandary whether to do it the 22nd or 21st. So I hope everybody's okay with what we're going to do. Okay, so for those of you who don't know a little bit about me, I'll give you a little of my background. I'm going to go pretty heavy into the Sumerian history and the Anunnaki, tying into the genealogy table. So when I start throwing out these names, and you start getting lost in name soup, that's why I'm going to have those available for you, so you can see who these beings are that we're talking about. And I'll also have a summary table so that you can see it as well. There's Satal. Morning, Satal. Okay. So this Council of 12 is probably one of the most important tables of all this information. Okay, so we're going to connect that to a lot of cultures, including the one here. Next, I'll give you kind of a documentary, astrological, and evidentiary basis for the Anunnaki on Earth. And then we'll go into a little bit more about the Sumerian cultures and what happened with the pre-diluvial cities and functionally what they were allocated to. Next, we'll cover a little bit of what's going on in terms of their acquisition of resources on this planet and how they use those pre-diluvial cities as part of their operation in Africa. Okay, so and then I'm going to give you kind of some images, statues, and modern depictions of their symbols to kind of make it real that they never left. Okay. Okay. So I was born in San Diego in 1963 at Sharks Hospital. I was a shark baby. If you've ever seen the hospital, it's got a stork on top carrying a little thing, so everybody thought that was a joke. I graduated from Guatamala High School, which is in San Diego, in 1982. Shortly after that, I was accepted to UCSD in the engineering program as an electrical engineer. I got there, was in my room, and I got contacted by someone who fanned my flames in my dream to be a pilot. And it turned out that the guy I was working for at the Point Loma Shopping Center saw me and he goes, "You should really fly helicopters," because I was interested in airplanes, and he had a P-51 Mustang he was restoring out at Montgomery Field in San Diego, and it got me close to it and really got me excited. So here I was, I'd just gotten accepted to the program I wanted to, had moved all the way from Arkansas to the West Coast by myself at 17, and it was achieving what I thought was my dream, and then I got a switch-o changeover. So I told you all I had massive and recurring dreams as a child of flying, and it was something that I knew I had to do in my life, and I didn't really know why. But there the opportunity presented itself, so I spent 7 years as a chief warrant officer in the Army flying attack helicopters. Actually, 6 of them. The last year I was kind of out of the attack game. I almost became a conscientious objector, and I started flying observation helicopters at that point. I returned to San Diego in 1989 after being honorably discharged as a CWO. And at that point, I went out to the exact same college, exact same school. I had to close that circle where I started. And so I completed my computer engineering degree and my master's degree in electrical engineering at UCSD. Actually, I was in the PhD program in electronic circuits and systems. They don't even really have a master's program, but they gave it to you in route if you met all the requirements. So I'd done everything with the dissertation when I had a little fallout with my advisor. I worked at many high technology companies in San Diego, both in aerospace, Johnson Space Center, telemetry, satellite communication, both with radio and laser. I worked with Sumerian Communications as the VP of Engineering, where we did our very first HDTV codec for ABC, where they broadcast Monday Night Football from New York to our facility on Copley Drive in San Diego. So we were the very first ones that did that. My little team digitized American television. So the people that started Sumerian Communications were on the MPEG steering committee, including the founder of digital television, who was Woo Pak from Korea. So he was on our board. So one of the other most interesting places I worked was Doreal telemetry and instrumentation, where we were working on the Global Star satellite constellation. So I designed the telemetry and command unit modem to communicate and command the satellites of the 48 constellations plus 4 spares that ended up being bought by the military. It was supposed to be a commercial program so that you could use it with your phone. Amazing clarity that they have on that system. And then the last really interesting company I worked at was called LightPoint Communications. It was a startup company. We raised about $77 million, and we produced free space optical transponders to connect high-speed data wirelessly in the infrared at maximally, we did 2.5 gigabits bidirectionally simultaneously. And these all had tracking systems. We mounted on poles, and it was a big paradigm shift for people that couldn't get fiber to their buildings but needed that kind of bandwidth. So that was the, and I did a lot of patents there. So during that time, I got very deep into where physics met the market, learning about how particulates in the atmosphere affected laser light being traveling miles to another building and be able to receive enough energy to receive them. So we did all kinds of neat things, a lot of neat patents in that area. And it really helped me a lot with Emerald Chapter 10, I think you'll see as we get there. In 2002, the telecom market in San Diego started melting down. And our investors from Silicon Valley told us, you know what? You guys, you little group of people that we've been doing this company with the LightPoint, it's time to take a hiatus because we're going to have to regroup and figure out how we're going to meet our market right. So during that time, my son JJ was born in 1999, so he was only about 3 when this happened. And I was running a triathlon with some people from the company there in San Diego, and I ran into a guy who I had just beat him on the bike going around Fiesta Island on this race. But I got off my bike and tried to run, and I got this terrible cramp in my leg, and I ended up on the ground stretching while he passed me. While I was down at that level watching him run, I'd never seen form in a human like that before. His structure was perfect, and he ran with effortlessly. I was like, how do you do that? Just getting off the bike, you know, because I was having a really hard time. And it turns out this guy said, well, you heard of structural integration? And I said, no, but it stuck. And being an engineer, I went and looked it up on the internet, found a book on it, you know, it was yay thick from a pioneering woman named Mayan Realm. And I read that book and didn't quite understand the physiology. It was very deep physiology, but her tenets on view of the body changed my reality because my kid had the same problem hers did. Her kid had polio, and that's how she discovered this work. Do you know what polio does? Yeah. So I actually went in 2004. I went to Boulder, Colorado, studied physiology while we were in this downtime hiatus as an engineer. I was very much an anomaly in that space. It was mostly body workers and such, massage therapists. But here I was, this really strange engineer getting involved in this, and no one really knew why I was there. But I had a mission. I wanted to learn what she knew to get my kid out of his braces. And he was 5 and he still could not walk. So without the braces, you know, it was just terrible what it was doing to his legs. And he had a condition as part of his genetic disorder, which is called the Georgia syndrome, that caused his connective tissue to be very loose. And it would drape down, like gravity would just up. He looked like a big sock that would just drape down his leg. And when I saw her work, I realized that that could be changed, and we'll go into that. So that really changed my life in terms of how I dealt with this real estate versus the energy that I had been working with in engineering. At that time, I kind of got interested in Asian technology, mostly building technology because it was obvious, but transportation as well. I've been exposed to some of the Sanskrit writings, and I realized that these vimanas were not only just a concept, they had diagrams. I'm showing how they were put together. So I got really interested in Asian technology, and I started to do some research to see what was already done so that I wasn't replicating the space. Well, I found out there was a lot of research that was done in that space. And in particular, a couple of people, I obviously read Chariots of the Gods by Eric Anunnaki. But after that, he mostly just asked questions to me and didn't answer them, right? And still, even today, there's some answers that he doesn't have relative to Los Dios, right? The gods. So that was interesting. That was very interesting to me because I was raised pretty hardcore Southern Baptist, I guess you would say. And I was so into the teachings of the Bible that I had actually gone through discipleship programs, and the church would send me out to teach them salvation doctrine when I was very young. So I was really on fire about what is true, and it was true for me at the time, right? So I had a deep exposure to the Bible. I've read it many times, and I actually was in a place where I thought, my mom thought I was going to be a preacher. Okay. And you know, that's an honorable thing if you're in the northwest corner of Arkansas. That's where they still live. So it's the Bible Belt, and there's still, we went back there and got involved with mega churches, and it's the same as it was when I was a kid. It's like, wow, fire and brimstone preachers, you know. So, let's see what else. So while I was studying engineering, though, I actually traveled all over the world, and I got exposed to cultures in the Middle East, in Europe, and started seeing symbols and signs and architecture that really, as an engineer, it piqued my curiosity, and I wanted to know more, especially in Turkey. So, and there's a story there. These folks in Turkey had taken us out to dinner in Bursa, Inigal, which is south of the Sea of Marmara. And they were sitting around and talking to me. They were my customers. And they knew a lot about America, all of our culture, which is, you know, 200 years old. There's not much to know, right? But their culture went way back in history. And I felt like I had to know a little bit about them so I didn't seem like, you know, an ugly American that didn't care about their culture, was just there to exploit them, right? And in that process, they woke me up to history, especially some of the symbols that I saw in the ancient mosques and all through the Sophia Mosque. Has anybody been to the Sophia Mosque in Istanbul? It's amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, during that time, I also filed a patent while I was over in Turkey with these guys to protect the free space optics market, which is where I was working at Lifetime. So once I was back, my first attempt at creating the Anunnaki Peru book, you know, using my genealogy and all the research I had, I started in 2004. And I really had never written a book before. I was kind of formal as a VP of engineering. Everything had its process and stuff. And so I hired an editor and tried to bring that book to life. And it turned out she was a recent convert to Judaism, and we had real problems. And it shut me down for over 5 years before I ever picked up a pen and pulled that stuff out of my box and started again. Well, about the time 2009 came, the ancient astronaut came on the History Channel, and they started broadcasting those shows, and I got really excited. But at the same time, I figured I'd missed the marketing window to get this information out. So, but Krista encouraged me that I hadn't, so after she wrote her book in 2013, in the spring, shortly thereafter, we were fighting for custody of my son JJ. And because of that process, we both got fired in the same week. Seriously, it was like a sign from heaven. She was relieved, and silently I was relieved too. But about 30 to 45 days after that event is when I wrote the Anunnaki Peru. Okay. And I had this huge box with all my information, all in my head. I already had it. So when I sat down and started writing, most of it came out in 40 days. It was amazing to me. Without 40 days, yeah, it was interesting. No bread, water, nothing else on the side. Anyway, so August 4th, I released the Anunnaki Peru, and within 3 weeks, we had gone to an event called Contact in the Desert, where George Norrie was. And it just so happened we were going to Joshua Tree to go camping. We hadn't really planned on going to that event. And I had 10 pre-order books. Krista was like, oh, let's go to this on the way. All right, hand one to George and see what happens. So we did that. And next thing you know, within a week later, I was on Coast to Coast doing my first national show. So I didn't start out at the bottom. I started out right at the national show with a 3-hour show, the very first one. I was so nervous. Getting ahead of myself, we left and came to Mexico about 2 years ago. I didn't know I was going to write another book. I was really focused on a movie script. I'd done 2 of them, and I had them in front of some investors trying to get this information out. And it didn't seem like it was going anywhere, and it required that I needed a lot more money to make this happen, way more than we had. So we were standing up near the Sea of Cortez in our little travel trailer, in kind of isolated place, but out on a parking lot, essentially, with a little sliver view of the ocean, but not much more. But we were very inspired. We were doing yoga every day. They allowed us to have a big organic garden, which we grew. And Krista was doing her next book. And so I got inspired. I think Thoth reached down and goes, hey, it's time for another one. And so it started about the summer of 2014, and by November, before my birthday came in December, I had mostly completed the book. So I was very surprised that this was coming out of me. How many have read The Seventh Planet? Okay, a lot of you. I know it's kind of a big book to carry around, but actually John's got one there. Let's see it. I ordered enough for everybody here, but unfortunately when we got here, we had lots of boxes stacked up, but the books weren't in there, so we still got to track them down. Okay, so there are my 2 books. And for those of you who are wondering, that's Hermes, right? Or Mercury, whichever one, depending on Greece or Rome. Well, you're going to see that he wasn't put up there to be a comic figure from Marvel Comics. There's actually a very strong connection to him, all the way back to even the Enuma Elish. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So this will be the first lecture. I don't think it will take 8 hours. I don't know if you guys can handle 8 hours in here, but we'll go through and we won't skip anything. And if you guys feel that it needs to go a different direction, we'll talk about it at the break, okay? Depending on how you do it. Okay, so let's kind of start out. You guys have had a chance to see this genealogy table. And the reason I put this one up here is it's got some of the very, very key players in it. Okay? So let's start at the top here. We have On, this is the male, and this is the female, Antu. They had 3 children, Anid, Anki, and Anuru. Okay? This one had no heir. It's probably hard to see from there, isn't it? But you can see it on the other table. So this one had no heir, it was cut out. This was the youngest son, and this was the middle son. So this one actually ended up being in line for rulership. Okay? So you can follow this down. So interestingly enough, some of the people showing up on their table were also affiliated with our planets. So here's Anshar was affiliated with Saturn, Kishar was affiliated with Jupiter, and it kind of goes on and on. And in the Enuma Elish that I broke down on the table, you'll see each of these key players was affiliated with a planet. Okay, so it's quite interesting. A couple other key players on here. Here's Enki, and you can't read that. He was the Lord of the earth and the waters. He was known as the Ahura Mazda here, and he was also known as Neptune or Poseidon in Greece and Neptune in Rome. This important person here. Now notice these are the offspring of Anu and Antu. This is Anu, this is his wife Antu. So Nin Herzog shows up in several of the old documents, and she eventually, you see, she ends up being called Lady of Earth, but she was also considered Isis in Egypt. So it's very, very interesting. Now so I do 3 or 4 of the players as the most seminal in what happened to us here. She was one of them, Enki was clearly one of them. Here's, and you can see that Enki's half-brothers Enlil was the offspring of Anu and Ki. Now, unfortunately for Enki, Ki was Anu's half-sister. And by inheritance rules, according to the Anunnaki, the offspring of the male and his half-sister are in line to rule, not the firstborn. So it has to do with the contribution of the mitochondrial DNA from the female to preserve the sacred bloodline. And they still do that now. Even some people do it in Europe. And Enlil's wife was Nismul. She was also called Su, the nurse. Okay. Turns out that she plays kind of a minimal role, but she does show up to the records. And we'll go through this a little bit more detail, but I wanted to kind of give you the players and their ranks. Okay, they had a hierarchical rank in a sexagesimal number system, the highest being rank 60. Every even rank, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, was a male. And every odd rank, 5, 15, 25, 35, and 45, and 55 were females. So there's 6 males and 6 females on a balanced count. Now, this one was as of 3760 BCE. I've made it a point to myself that I'd like to have a table like this for each zodiacal house as it changed, so you could really see who was in charge when certain events went down according to these events in history, so you could see who was behind it. Okay, very powerful council. So when you go back into the Enuma Elish, back into the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Atrahasis account, when you see these names, these are the names that show up in there. Okay, so now you realize they were related to each other and they were in charge. Okay, so can everybody see this? Here's Anu and Antu, his wife, 60, 55. Ninril, Enlil's wife, she was ranked 45, 50. Now notice the preponderance and the heavy weighting in what I call the Enlilites on this council. Look at all the Enlils, offspring on this council versus Enki at that time. Okay, so Enlil was predicated, and he was the second highest rank. So his father Anu was 60, and Enlil's rank was 50. So that number 50 is very important. You see that in Babylon, when Marduk eventually took over that role, he would have the 50 names of Marduk read, because he now took over that rank of 50. Okay? Let's see who else. Nannar, very important person, Nannar. Nanar's sin shows up not only in the Atrahasis, but he shows up in the Lamentations of War and several other documents. Okay, and when you find out who Nannar really was, it might make a lot of sense what's happening between the Palestinians and the Israelites. Okay. Who else? Nana. Now notice that Nana, I show her as a different rank here than Ninhartshog. Ninhartshog, as you remember from the diagram, is Isis. Okay, so this is Enki and Enlil's half sister. She's so important. Whoever has a kid with her is in line to rule. So the fact that she was here with them simultaneously and them vying for her, you can see it was a struggle. And so I think she had children with both of them. And she had a lot of children with Enki. But Inanna was a different being, and a lot of times I see the documents that these two are equated with the same person. Their attributes and their ranks were different. I believe they were very different people, but for some reason, there's been a namesake occlusion going on, where Inanna has been trying to take over not only the rank of Ninhartshog, but also her planet, which she was associated with Venus. So yesterday, when we were walking by the observatory, and it was dedicated to locating the traversal path of the 3 windows of the observatory of the path of Venus. Now you know why, once you find out who Quetzalcoatl was. Right? And think about the story of Isis, Osiris, and Horus. It's so important in Egypt. It's connected to this. Okay, did I leave anybody else out? Nannar, very important. Oh, somebody brought up the idea of Isra-Adad. He was one of Enlil's sons also. And if you look into some of the religion and teachings that happened in Turkey under Hattusa, under the Hittite kingdom in Turkey, they venerated these same beings, and Isra-Adad was one of their chief deities. He was known as the storm god, perpetuating a lightning bolt just like his dad, Zeus. Okay, so I threw a little picture of Enki. Clearly, he's associated with the waters here, the fish. When you see the sign of the fish in the water, it's almost always alluding to him. Does that bring up any possible connection with the fish you see that's affiliated with the Christians that are putting it on the back of it? Right. It really represents the age of Pisces, and Pisces was, I think, very important to Enki. Enlil was kind of interesting in his. He was, and they're all avatars. You have to understand. These beings had different genetics than we did, and they understood energy and matter in a very different way than we did. And we'll talk about that. But here's a depiction of Enlil emanating his energy body, right? Where he was a very occluded god. He did not allow himself to be in interaction with a lot of people directly. He always had some liaisons. Same thing on Mount Sinai. Here's Nannar Sin, his son. Utu Shamash was another one that shows up. And here's Ninhartshog, who later became Isis. Okay. Everybody doing okay? Caught it. Sorry. Okay. So I want to start back in time and bring you forward the story of the Anunnaki before we get into all this other data. Okay. So First, I want to talk about the Enuma Elish. It's so important. Let me make sure I didn't have a dedicated slide for this. We got that one before. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up here while I talk to it so you guys can see the names, what's going on. Okay, so what do we know? Number one, we have writings to indicate that they've been here for a very long time. And this is where it becomes unbelievable. Okay? Berossus in 330 BCE got the writings of the Babylonians and tried to translate them into Greek so that they knew the history of this civilization. Well, it turns out he composed a Sumerian kings list that when you count the tenures of each of these beings, which is very hard to believe, it goes back about 420,000 years. Okay, and I'm going to show that to you. You ask yourself, how's that possible? Consider it possible for now. Okay? Well, 450,000 years ago, and you can see this on the back of the genealogy table, they were having perturbations with their atmosphere as they came into close aphelion with the sun. So imagine being out a very long distance from the sun on a far elliptical orbit, having very little radiation, and then coming in very close to the sun, and all of a sudden your atmosphere experiences a new level of energy that it hadn't gotten before until the last time, right? So in their account, they talk about being trapped into our solar system orbit. Well, how could that have happened? Okay, this is the Enuma Elish. This is their Babylonian epic of creation. So, my theory is that because of how we receive different energy next to the galactic center, which is our Milky Way galaxy, it's kind of like a flattened spiral energy mass that's dragging a bunch of debris around in a circle. Okay, when you see it from the Hubble telescope, that's what it looks like. Well, in that plane of the galactic center, the energy is very, very strong. And the radiation is so strong it's not survivable for humans, unless you had a planet that had an atmosphere that could protect you. Okay? So, what we know is, during some perturbation event in our galaxy, the Buru, which they called their home planet, was experiencing problems with their atmosphere such that they were basically being irradiated by the sun, and their atmosphere was dwindling each time they went through this orbit. So in that account, the very first account of the Enuma Elish, this event, this catalyst that caused them to go from their normal orbit to being trapped into our solar system orbit, to me, wasn't explained in the Enuma Elish, but I believe it had a lot to do with them passing through the galactic center, just like we did on October 20th, 2011, according to Ian Lundpool. A lot of people believe it was December 21st, 2012, the solstice, but that doesn't line up with the Mayan calendar. It was actually in 2011. Now, if that happened, what kind of changes could we be experiencing in our Earth, going through this higher energy plane as we traverse this? And it appears to traverse it almost like a sinusoidal wave. So our entire solar system meanders through this center of our galaxy through what they call a great year. It takes 13,000 years to go through one, and then 13,000 to come back. So it ends up about 25,920 years, which composes a great year. Now, it just so happens that the Anunnaki were aware of that and based our calendar system on that, based on the precession of our equinox. It was very interesting. So 450,000 years ago, Alulim, who was the king on the Buru, he was a usurper king, by the way. He apparently got the kingship by pushing his rival out the window. They normally wrestled whenever they had a squabble that needed to be resolved. Kind of like I don't think it was like the UFC, it was more like Greco-Roman wrestling. And they did it naked. But Alulim didn't do that. He actually pushed the guy out the window and usurped the kingship. Anu was the next one in line to rule. And he ended up being Alulim's cupbearer for quite a period of time until he couldn't take the shenanigans from him anymore. They ended up having a wrestling match. Anu won, and at that point he decided to punish Alulim for what he had done as a usurper king, and he ended up being sent into exile to the earth. So Alulim left Nibiru about 450,000 years ago, came to the earth, found some colloidal gold in our Persian Gulf area, made contact back with Nibiru, as a way to negotiate getting back out of exile and back in with the people, because they wanted the gold. Because they knew that they either had to spawn their volcanoes to create a barrier to protect them from the solar radiation, or they had to put something in the atmosphere that would last as they came into close aphelion with the sun. Otherwise, they'd be barbecued to death. So Alwyn knew this, and he was a high-ranking ruler, and he knew what their wishes were. So he negotiated, made contact back with Anu, and tried to make this happen. So when you read about the Anzu clan of the Anunnaki, he was the start of that. Okay? Well, Anu got the message, realized that this gold could be the solution to their atmospheric problem, just like we're having right now, our problem with our atmosphere, right? What do you think all this chemtrail spraying's for? There were many reasons for it, but that was one of them. So we're going through the Galactic Center according to the Mayans right now. Well, we have the same problem they did with the radiation. So at that point, Anu decides to send his premier son, who's the scientist, on Nibiru, and he shows up in the Enuma Elish. Okay, he's called E.A. Nudubu when you read it. He was dispatched here about the same time, came here, landed in the Persian Gulf in his fish suit, like you saw, emerged from the waters, and set up the very first city on this planet, and it was called Eridu. Does everybody know, have heard of Eridu? Okay. This is a site right where the Tigris and Euphrates meet in southern Iraq, right before it empties into the Sea of Reeds in the Persian Gulf. Okay? It turns out that there's a couple other rivers that you can now see from satellite that come in from east and west, arriving in Eridu, and we'll talk about that from Genesis as well. So, at that point, Enki attempted to get colloidal gold out of the Persian Gulf. And after about 5,000 years of this, apparently they were not meeting their quota to get it back to one of the pre-diluvial cities where they were processing this and then sending it back via a way station on Mars and back to the Nibiru, according to the writings. Okay? So here's, I think this was a lot more legible if people can see this. So this was the actual team that was involved. Here's Nishida, who turns out in the Enuma Elish being affiliated with the planet Mercury. Okay, so let's do a little bit more on the Enuma Elish so you know what happened. According to their account, something perturbed their planet and their small constellation. It looks like there's about 5 satellites plus possibly their own sun in this constellation. So think of it as a mini solar system. Okay? Well, when it would come into the first time through, once it got captured by our our Milky Way galaxy. Now think about this, there's a 14 trillion mile diameter black hole at the center of our galaxy. Every galaxy has a black hole that consumes matter, and it creates a massive gravitational field in the plane along with which it's spinning, okay? So, my theory was, and I got to do more work on this to corroborate it, but at that point in their account, their planet got caught up in our solar system orbit with our sun. Okay? So they describe this in their Enuma. That's why it's so important to understand that. At that point, they realized that our inner planets were going to be problems for them and possibly causing a collision as they went around this sun and hopefully escaped back out without being destroyed. The first time through, they made some preparations and they discuss it as masking radiation and doing this and that. They were doing things to the inner planets to protect themselves. Well, the second time around, this would be another 3,600 years that it took. Okay, this is a term called a SAR for them. S-A-R. That means 3,600 years in their writings. It's both in the Atrahasis and it's in the Sumerian Kings list. You'll see that they served their rulership in SARs, the first pre-diluvial kings. Okay? So, when they coming around the second time, they describe a planet called Tiamat. Tiamat is approximately where the Earth is now. At that point, one of the satellites of Nibiru struck Tiamat and split it wide open. Okay? So part of it became our Earth, and another part of it became Kingu, which they call our moon. So that's why our moon is a very unusual size relative to our planet. It's very large as a satellite, and very unusual. Additionally, the debris from that impact, according to their writings, became the Hammered Bracelet, which is our asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Okay? So here they are, this ancient document describing the configuration of our solar system better than our scientists knew even up until 1930. We didn't know about Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, or what colors they were, whether they were watery planets, or any of that. It was all in the Sumerian writings. So it's very, very interesting. Okay, so about 5,000 years later, Enki wasn't getting the gold fast enough in the Persian Gulf. But let's go back a little bit here. And at that point, Anu dispatched his next son. You remember he had a son with Ki. Anu and Ki, her other name was Rash. Ki is the word for earth in Sumerian. Okay? So all of a sudden you're like, well, he had a son, Enlil, with Ki, and he ended up being a higher ranking than Enki. You can see that. There's 40. Okay, here's some of his other names in case you're looking at this. There's Uri names, Sumerian name, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and you can extend this list all over the world. I'm talking East Asia, India, all over. They have the same genesis of beings that showed up in the Octahasis and the New Age. Okay, so I spent a lot of time connecting it to Viking gods, all over the world, and that'll probably be my next venue, is to go to another place and help that culture connect with what really happened. So I feel like that's my mission in Mexico right now. So we'll see where it goes. When I'm done sweating, I'll probably go on to Europe. Okay. I'm going to go back just a little bit here. Make sure I didn't do something else right. Okay, so we talked about the Enuma, and I want you to think about this galactic center, how important that is as the solar system passes through it. Now, does anybody have any problems understanding what precession is, to know how they correlated the wobble of our planet with the precessional time and the sexagesimal time system they were using on the Earth? So here, imagine this. You're traveling across the galaxy, you land on a planet, and you go, what time is it? Well, what time is it on our planet? Can we figure that out? Okay, well, how do we correlate that time with this planet so that we can synchronize our way of delineating events in time? Well, the way they did that was noticing that our Earth was on a tilted orbit. And whenever you take a gyroscope and spin it, it'll normally stay straight up and down, right? But if you happen to give it a little tap, it'll introduce a wobble, okay? And that causes what's called precession. So when something's rotating in one direction, and it's creating a coefficient of friction drag against the surface it's touching, or the atmosphere, okay, it causes a precession in the opposite direction over time. And it turns out that our Earth precesses in the opposite direction of rotation 1 degree every 72 years. So if you were at one of these solstice or equinox temples and watching the sun on a particular day, well, 1 year it might be right there, but after 72 years it's going to move a degree. It's going to keep moving, right, like that, all the way around the zodiacal circle. And so if you do the math, 360 degrees times 72 equals 25,920. That's why it was considered a bright year. Okay. So they correlated the Burian time with our Earth time. And it just so happens, if you go back to August 11th, 3014 BC, that was mentioned on the tour yesterday, that was the date the stone stela down near Izapa was found. And we're going to talk about that. At which point, a long count, the Mayan long count, started a declining count all the way up to this very important event that somebody knew about. How did they know about an event called the Great Year way back then? But that's what the entire Mayan calendar counts down to, is this event as we pass through the ball, going through the hoop on the side, is representative of our solar system going through the galactic center. And that was encoded in the Mayan calendar. That's why it was so significant to it. And then you realize who the Mayan calendar came from, and all the calendars in Mesopotamia came from. And it was the same being, the same one that shows up in the Anunnaki. Okay? This also brings up the concept of dividing the heavens into 12 segments, which our zodiacal houses were done for us by the Sumerians, which is still in use today. Okay? So we have 12 zodiacal houses that basically gave a 30-degree slice to a 360-degree circle, which is essentially, if you use an equivalent model, it comes out 2,160 years per zodiacal house. So you could go, okay, 2,160 years, how are the humans being treated then? How are they enslaved? Do they have freedom? You can kind of look and see who was on the council and go, look like more of an enslaver than somebody who was empowering their beings to evolve, right? So, ultimately, this question came up about how much were we able to be evolved under these people who were ruling us, okay? So this essentially is what I call a zodiac term limit.
That procession you're talking about, is that procession is like 4 seconds in a year on each zodiacal cycle?
Oh, well, imagine you have the sun with its here, and it's got the equator that's right through the center. Okay, all our planets go around the sun on that ecliptic, okay, the solar ecliptic. So the precession is the Earth relative to the sun, where it rises and strikes the Earth on that particular day. Well, since it's rotating one way and precessing the other way, the precession is what we're focused on here. Okay, that's the 1 degree every 72 years. It slips. It's a slippage. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? Maybe we'll do it. Okay, now, one of the other things I did is when I saw some of the writings here, I recreated the zodiac house both in an equivalence model, and there's another model that actually takes into account the exact transit of the light through these houses. So the equivalence model was an easy model to use because everybody had 30 degrees and 2,160 years. Whereas the actual transit model was how long does it really take to go through these signs? Is it all plus or minus 50 years? So it's a little bit different, and some of them are different. So I recreated that so I could go back and compare with some of the things that were said in the ancient documents to see which house we were really in. So I'm going to share that with you. We're on time. Oh. Well, we've been going for about 45 minutes. You guys need to stand up and have a break? Okay? Okay, let's go about another 15 minutes until I sweated this batch out and we'll be on the next one. Okay. Oh, and also I mentioned on that last bullet, how many of you have actually read or listened to the Emerald Tablets? Okay, raise your hands one more time just so I know. The Emerald Tablets, who has read or listened to all the Emerald Tablets?
Not all of it.
Okay. Okay, well in the Emerald Tablets there's some very key connections to some of this information. So I'm wondering how deep I need to go in that. Okay. Okay, let me see. Okay, so we got the Anunnaki Council rank. I think it's very interesting to see here that Gazeta and Sheeta fall from Mercury. Turns out to be the person on the front of my second book, and I did that for a particular reason. I'll share it with you why. Here you can see in Egypt, Enki was named Thoth, sign in Greece, and Neptune in Rome. This was very interesting to me. You realize that Kronos is different than being Chronos. Because Kronos was on him, but Kronos was actually his father.
So looking at Egypt, and you don't have 150. What's this one?
This one?
Yeah.
We didn't. Enlil stayed up in Mesopotamia, and he really didn't have a name. He wasn't one of the gods of Egypt, right? That wasn't his domain. Oh, so let me talk about that real quick. So in the Enuma Elish, or the Altarhasis, very early in the first tablet, Anu was summoned to the earth to deal with his two sons who were here in line to rule, Enlil and Enki. And they don't really get along because Enki's a scientist and Enlil is like a bureaucratic commander. And they're not, they don't see eye to eye at all. And so he came to the earth while they were searching for this gold before they went to Africa. Actually, right after they went to Africa, to essentially decide how they were going to partition their functions. And there were 4 partitions as they cast lots. Okay, it's right into document. Anu was going to participate with them and actually stay here to work. He drew the lot to go back to Nabu. Lucky for him. Then have to slave in those South African mines, right? And he got the whole domain of Africa, which they call the Abzu. And then Enlil was assigned Lord of the Command, where the Bond Heaven Earth facilities were located in Mesopotamia. And you'll see these pre-diluvial cities and how they had allocated these, including Nippur and Sapar, two of the most important ones. Okay. So the other division was the Indus Valley that was given to Inanna. Okay, so all the feminine that came through the Indus Valley in India was under Inanna's rule. This was circa 2900 BCE. And then the last area was the Sinai. Inanna. Inanna, Ishtar, Hathor, and Adina. Now this is very controversial. Because actually, this was her side, and this is where the infighting has been going on between these two through all time. Okay? But Inanna got the Indus Valley. Ninhursag was assigned the Sinai Peninsula region because that's where the Anunnaki were only allowed. No humans were allowed in there. And that's where one of their space facilities was. Okay. Oh, here we go. So let's talk about Anu real quick. As I showed you on the table, he was the son of Anid. He was born under Buru. He overthrew Alalu as the usurper king. He did visit the earth multiple times, and we see this in the record. He visited Uruk, Gilgamesh's city once, and he also was in Africa at one of the council meetings when they were deciding what to do with these uprising workers. And he did that. Let's talk about this meeting real quick. So, Enki wasn't getting enough gold colloidally from the ocean, according to whatever milestones they had set forth to try to have enough to put through their whole atmosphere. And what we're talking about is like a talcum powder form of the gold. Okay, it's a different form of gold. You can't ionize gold by itself. When you melt it, it turns into a liquid, right? So they were adding something to it to take advantage of its shielding properties, and also making it so small it could be like a vapor in the atmosphere.
Is that like the monatomic gold?
Well, that's originally why they were in the Persian Gulf, because there was a lot of monoatomic gold readily available, just not enough to do what they thought they were going to do. So Enki's down in Africa now. He just drew lots. His dad goes back to Uru, and now Enlil's up in Mesopotamia, but also he's the lord of the command. So he's overseeing his brother big time, probably in a very onerous way, because they did not get along. Right? So you'll see in the meeting in the Anuba Elish, Anu was there, Enki was there, and Ninhursag was there, and so was a few of the other ones, okay? Including Ningshita, or Gazeta, who we now know was Thoth in Egypt. Okay? So their problem was, how do we get this gold and get it back and save our atmosphere before we come into aphelion with the sun? So they were a little bit under pressure. Okay? Anu, everybody tries to decide, well, were these good gods or bad gods relative to us? So I'm going to kind of give you a little predisposition on what I felt about Anu. There were two instances that we got from Anu's relationship to humans. One of them was in the Izapa tale, where the first Adam that was created by him was taken back into Peru. And he kind of viewed them as downtrodden people, almost like pets, in a way. And that also showed up in the second dynasty of Peru, where they're talking in a council meeting about what to do with these beings in the city of war. And it's very disturbing if you haven't read that. That's actually in chapter 3 or 4 of my book. It actually brought me to tears when I read it doing the audiobook. It was so disturbing. Okay. So let's see what else we can find out on Anu. I showed you where he was at the rankers, so you kind of get an idea. Very high ranking, but you can see An right here was the true Chronos. He was the top dog. And that's where they all came from. I want you also to notice the way they did the names. They oftentimes had a little dot there that separated the syllables. And when we get into the cuneiform, you'll see that how these phonemes can be concatenated together to make up these words. Okay. Here's a couple of images of Anu. Now this is a very interesting image here. These beings on the side are holding two gates open, while this being is stepping through. Okay? And William Henry wrote something in his book about this. And I actually picked up on it and investigated it. And it truly appears that this was corroborated with Anu's visit to the city of Uruk, okay, King Gilgamesh's city, where he had used not a spacecraft like they had to get here, he had used a portal to come down. And the reason that's important is because Saddam Hussein knew about this. As a matter of fact, the city of Uruk was very much on his list of an area that he needed to excavate because he knew about this portal that Anu had used. We'll talk about that. So, in the Gulf War in 1991, the United States invaded Iraq with a desert shield, or desert storm. Saddam Hussein was busy excavating the city of Uruk, looking for this as they were coming in here. The greatest army in the world is there fighting him, and he's focused on that. And by the way, Saddam Hussein believed he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. And it turns out Nabu, that being, was an offspring of Enki's son Marduk. So Nabu was Marduk's first son in that region near Babylon. Very, very interesting. So Saddam may have done some things like trying to trade for oil and gold and cause conflict with the New World Order folks, but he also was in possession of some very important knowledge about the city of Uruk, which was so important because the Epic of Gilgamesh was written in that city, and it's one of the longest epics we have in the Middle East. This is a picture of Anu's Mayan Temple in Uruk from the east. So a lot of these sites have been excavated, some of them have not, and I'll give you a few pictures of ones that have. Okay, let's go to Anu. Now remember, this is the son of Anu and Ki, so he's actually the ruler, rank 50. Urash is another name for her. He was the Lord of Command, and that meant bond heaven and earth facilities in particular. Nippur was their mission control headquarters. That's where Enlil hung out, and Sapar was their landing site. And I think our copy breaks here. I mentioned in the Atrahasis, they divided these four regions. Nippur was the headquarters for bond heaven and earth. And that was his, he had many, many children, including Ninurta, who turns out to be a very important being. He wasn't on the council at the time. Later on in Greece, he was. Okay? So I want you to keep this in mind. These 12 beings in Sumeria became the Greek pantheon, and their names were exactly the same. So Zeus was Enlil, Poseidon was Enki, Isis was Aphrodite, and on and on and on down this council. It was a direct. Ningshita, Hermes in Greece became Mercury in Rome. Okay? Well, before that, that Ningshita name never changed, so, and he was Thoth in Egypt. So now all of a sudden, these 12 beings, at least at a particular time in the zodiacal house, moved across cultures but changed their name, but kept the same symbols and same functions. Now this is quite interesting. Enlil had a general in the city of Ur where Abram was from. Now, so in the Lamentations of Ur, all of a sudden, this is where we find out that Enlil had other names that end up showing up in our Bible. Okay, this is where it got very controversial for all the Abrahamic religions, whether it's Islam, Judaism, or Christianity. They're all considered Abrahamic religions, tied directly to the relationship of Abram and his god of Ur, who we know a lot about now. We found lots of tablets in there, and all the rituals they were doing venerating this being. Okay? So Enlil had many different names. He became known as Yahweh, El Shaddai, Jehovah, but in Greece he was Zeus, the same being. Okay? Let's look at Enlil again to get reoriented. So here Enlil is the offspring of Anu and Ki, and you can see some of his titles, Lord of the Air and Earth. And they originally, Enki was the Lord of the Earth, so they got a conflict in title right there. That was the source of a lot of their problems. Is, you know, these are powerful beings, and they had to have their territory without any incursions. There was war, major problems. And there's some of the other names going on there as well. Let's see some pictures of Enlil. Here's a picture of Enlil from Samaria. Another one of his days in Samaria. I like the woven beard part. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. It's kind of Here's a statue of him holding a lightning bolt, Zeus in Greece. And here's another one that came from Sumerian. This shows up in $70 worth as well. And it's interesting. What do you think they had on the wrist there? It's like a watch, a timekeeping piece, some sort of communication device. Very interesting. And here's a kind of a Hollywood picture. Animal is Zeus. This might be a good stopping point to get our topic right now. Okay, so we're about to move on to Enki. So let's take a break right here. Everybody cool off, get some water, and let's take 15 minutes, okay? So what time is it?